Thank you, guys. Thank y'all. Let me see if I can set the stage tonight. I want to give you a perspective on marriage, but I want to go back first and give you a perspective on the country and why we're special.
In my U.S. history class, sometimes studying Thomas Jefferson was a little bit difficult. He was always talking about unalienable rights and saying things like, we hold these truths to be self-evident.
What in the world is an inalienable right? The founding fathers who did the documents told us what an inalienable right is. It's very simple. John Adams said it this way. He said inalienable rights are antecedent to all, in other words, they come before. They existed before all earthly governments. They cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws. Their rights derive from the great legislator of the universe. If you remember the book of Genesis, man is created, man and woman, back in Genesis 1 through 3. It's not until we get over to chapter 9 of Genesis that we get around to civil government. There are a whole set of rights that God gave mankind before he ever came up with civil government. And so inalienable rights are rights that existed in the first 8 chapters before government ever showed up on the scenes.
It took me a couple of tries, but I think I understand it now. Here's why. On the day I was born, I automatically had a relationship with my mother and my father. That's the power of a biological bond. It happens naturally. That's what self-evident means.
These are inalienable rights. And so what we have with the Bill of Rights is a listing of God-given rights that government is not supposed to mess with, that belong to us because God gave them to us. So that's the second premise that we have, is inalienable rights come from God. The third thing the Declaration tells us in those 126 words is that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now, we just got the purpose of government. The Declaration says governments exist to protect God-given rights. That's the third thing we believe, is government exists to protect inalienable rights. Again, the Founding Fathers are very explicit on that. Going back to Sam Adams said, governments was originally designed for the preservation of inalienable rights. The fourth point that we find in the Declaration says, again in those 126 words, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitles them. I can look at nature and tell that self-defense is right. God's put it in nature to defend your home, to defend your property, to defend your young. God's also put it in nature, there's no slavery. Slavery is not part of nature. That's a violation of natural law to have slavery. Horses don't enslave cows, and cows don't enslave sheep. We don't do that in nature. You don't have slave. So I know that the right to liberty is the right to life is part of natural law. Okay, let me spell it out for you really specifically. Let me give you the laws of nature's God, the God who created nature. And see, in nature, adultery is really common. But God says, no, here's the laws of the God who created nature, and I'm telling you, do not commit adultery. You see, we look at nature and we say, you know, theft is really common. They take whatever they can get away with. God says, yeah, but you're higher than the animals. You're not going to steal. You don't get to do theft. You know, incest is common in nature. God says, no, you're not doing this. So we have the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God. Now, the laws of nature, and again, the laws of nature's God we find in the Scriptures, that's what forms the Seventh Amendment of the Constitution, what we call the common law. See, marriage is protected in the common law because that's one of the laws of nature's God.
Whether you call it nature or God, each of us exists only through a mom and a dad. Every person has that exact same birthright. If ever I was endowed by my Creator with certain unalienable rights, this is it: to be born with a mom and a dad. Why? Because it is impossible to be born any other way. Traditional marriage is designed to protect this unalienable right given by the Creator that Jefferson spoke of. When we redefine marriage, we begin to fight against the unalienable rights of children. Tonight, I am here to represent those children, and I would like to say one more thing on our behalf. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It takes a mom and a dad to create a child. So it takes a mom and a dad to raise one.
We believe there's a fixed moral law. There are certain things that are right and wrong because the God who created earth and created nature and gave us His word says there's certain things you can't do.
When we favor the wants of consenting adults over the needs of children who cannot consent, something is very wrong. Children shouldn't be separated from their parents without a very good reason. When a child is separated from a parent through death or divorce, it is a tragedy that changes his or her whole life. When separation must happen, we should be honest enough to admit that it is very painful for the child. Gay marriage is hurtful to children because it becomes the tool that separates children from at least one of their parents. Why would the government encourage, let alone enforce, such hurtful separation?
The consent of the governed is not allowed to change moral law. It's not allowed to change the laws of nature or of nature's God. Doesn't matter if 12 states vote and say we're going to redefine marriage. You can't change the laws of nature or nature's God. That's part of our founding documents. That's part of the 7th Amendment to the Constitution.
Grown-up romantic feelings are not reason enough to separate a kid from a biological parent. When redefining marriage, we have to pretend that if adults are happy, then everyone is happy. Problem is, pretending won't help. And if a kid like me calls them out on it, things can get ugly very quickly. As previously stated last March, I spoke at the celebration of marriage at the Capitol Rotunda. After, the protesters got on Facebook and Twitter and said that I was being brainwashed and being taught to be a hater. To that I say, no child needs to be taught to want a mom and a dad. It's a biological instinct. They have to be taught. They do, however, have to be taught that it's normal to be taken away from one parent. The protesters went on to call me every name imaginable. I can take the heat, but let me take a moment to speak a language they understand. When an adult gay man beats up on a 13-year-old girl on Facebook, there's a name for that. When you call a young girl brainwashed, bigoted, and a hater, there's a name for that. When you dismiss my opinions and my needs just because I'm weaker or younger than you are, there's a name for that. When you use the law to separate defenseless children from their mom or dad for no reason other than your desires, there's a name for that too. It's called bullying.
Matthew 22:21, Jesus said, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's and to God that which is God's. Hey, there's certain things that belong to God, there's certain things that belong to government. Does marriage belong to God or belong to government? It belongs to God. If you don't have civil officials who recognize that there's a fence there, that this stuff is not government's, government can't redefine it because we'd be stealing. We're going to somebody else's yard to take their stuff and bring it over here and repaint it. You can't do that. Wait a minute, look what the court said about that way back 100 years ago. Court said this, it says marriage was not originated by human law. This doesn't belong to government. We're not the ones who brought this into being. It says when God created Eve, she was a wife to Adam. They then and there occupied the status of husband to wife and wife to husband. The truth is that civil government has grown out of marriage, which created homes and population and society from which government became necessary. Again, that's Genesis 1-8 before you get to government in Genesis 9. Continues, marriages will produce a home and a family that will contribute to good society, to free and just government, and to the support of Christianity. It's family that produces all that. Continues, it says, it would be sacrilegious to apply the designation, quote, a civil contract to such a marriage. It's that and more. It's a status ordained by God. The court said, there's no way we're going to go in and redefine this because it doesn't belong to us, it belongs to God. That's over in His jurisdiction. We're not allowed to mess with His stuff in His jurisdiction.
The heart of a lion is something that we use as a kind of thing in Africa for a person that's courageous, that has no fear. That 13-year-old girl that just spoke, that is a young girl with the heart of a lion. Where is she? Is she still here? Is she still here? Where is she? Amelia, can you come?